Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Women Talking Money podcast. My name is Gretchen from Magenta Financial Planning, and today I'm joined by Dr. Moira Somers. Moira is a psychologist, a family wealth consultant, and executive coach specializing in the psychology of money. She's also a faculty member at both the Ultra High Net Worth Institute, the Sudden Money Institute, and leads the Financial Psychology Special Interest Group for the American Psychological Association. Writing is a really big part of her career, and she's also written an international bestseller called Advice That Sticks and How to Give Advice That People Will Follow. She's a regular contributor to many financial publications and podcasts. Moira is from Canada, but she has clients all around the globe. So welcome, Moira, and thank you for joining me today.
Pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
So, Moira, do you want to just I've said the basic of your biography, your little bio there, but do you want to tell us a little bit more?
Sure. I just stumbled in from my garden where I was battling the mosquitoes to just do my favorite thing, which is to, prune the roses and to be out there on a beautiful summer day.
Lovely. And I bet you're having a much nicer summer than us because we're not having a good summer. So today we're here to talk about money, which I know that you are, pretty comfortable with the concept because it's what you do in your day-to-day life, and you've written about it, and you're a part, many, many different roles that you've got. But I know that this is going to be slightly different because it's going to be about me asking you questions about money on a personal level. So I really appreciate you being willing to share. Let's start with early on in life and anything that you can kind of remember about money as you were growing up, or whether you talked about it as a family, or any memories you might be able to share with me about that.
We were a family of modest means. Certainly all our needs were met, that's for sure, but we didn't have a lot of abundance, I would say. I remember my parents just, talking about the importance of living within our means and of saving up for the things that were important. So, just those basic middle class principles of making sure that you managed well with what you had. One of the memories that I had wasn't one that I thought was interesting. Wasn't from when I was really little, Gretchen. It was from when I was probably 12 or 13, and it was sitting around the table when my brother came home. He was working overseas on a dredge in the Persian Gulf, and he showed us his pay stub, and he had more money taken off in taxes than my mom earned. And I remember thinking just how grossly unfair that this pup who knew nothing was being paid so much more than my mom, who was doing really, really valuable work. And this, gender divide, and of course I knew nothing about danger pay or hazard pay or all of that kind of stuff, but it just, the unfairness of that, and the loyalty to my mom, and how my brother, who hadn't even finished high school, was earning so much money at that point. That was one of the strong early memories of money, and just how things weren't always fair in terms of earning. That was probably my first real awareness that you don't always get what you deserve. Years later, I traveling on an airplane. I remember always remember when when there were magazines in the back of when we weren't worried about dying by touching a magazine, there was always an ad for a bargaining course, and it was, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate, and that was my first lesson in that, with respect to earning. You don't get what you don't earn what you deserve, you earn what you negotiate. And I learned that perhaps at age 10 or 12.
Wow, yeah. And do you think that because my question that I quite often ask people then is like, what was your first job, and how much did you get paid in that job? So do you think that early kind of shock of, hang on, your brother was earning kind of this much money and your mum was earning this much money, do you think that shaped like the way that then you started going through things, either as a youth with a job, or even in your first kind of jobs where you were doing as a career?
I think I didn't find my voice around that until much later. As a youth, doing retail, I didn't even cross my mind that I might have been able to ask for anything more. And what I learned later on was that, again, that is very much a gendered thing. That women just tend to accept what they're offered, and men tend not to. And that happens, not so much even with summer jobs, but certainly with your first real grown-up job. And if you accept what you're offered with your first real grown-up job, that is one of the things that contributes to the earnings divide. And it's very hard to ever make that up, in subsequent years. And so one of the very first things that I do when I'm doing coaching for university students, in MBA programs, for example, is teach people to negotiate their starting salaries, because it's very hard to make up the difference in subsequent years if you don't do it from the outset.
And I think there's this like psychology, isn't there, that, oh, well, I've been offered a job and it feels like it's okay. And, often we're making decisions because we really need a job, or we really, wanted that job. And so, yeah, part of that negotiation or even thinking about negotiating, or whether you need to, and being filled with equipped with the facts to know whether you need to negotiate, is a big thing.
Yeah. And you don't want to come across as you're all that if you're not all that. And
Yeah.
there's so many factors that go into decisions. But there's just a very well documented phenomenon that women tend to want their work to speak for itself. We want to do good work and to be rewarded for the work that we do. And by definition, that takes time. That's a process that takes time to unfold. Whereas there is another way to go into that, which is to do some research about what this work is worth, and to have a little bit of confidence that you are in fact a hard worker and a good worker and capable of doing this job, and that you will go in and determine and show your worth from the outset, show that you have the skill set from the outset, which is what a lot of people do who happen to be of the male gender. So if you can kind of show up with that kind of energy to the interview and negotiate that from the outset, it tends to really narrow the pay gap and leave you in a better stance from the outset.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think some of that is about confidence. Well, a lot of that is about confidence, like an innate confidence that somehow, not every man, but traditionally, we would say men have in a more clear way than women do. And in that, as they go into that,
I don't. Again, sometimes that gets I get really concerned that everything about women can get boiled down to confidence. I think somehow there's just there's an unspoken set of rules about how it is that we should behave. And I think sometimes it doesn't necessarily have to do with confidence. It has to do with socialization about how we should behave.
Mm.
So we can go in knowing that we are going to go in and we are going to do a good job, but the socialization is that's then when we should get the raise. That it's a socialization thing. That it's good manners rather than confidence,
Mm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so to say that there are different ways to be well mannered. So if we can have some role models, a different model of confidence is actually something that we call self-efficacy, which is, do we have some models of how to behave differently? Of the, here is a model of success, of working out well, that's consonant with your how you want to show up in the world as a good person, as a hard worker, as a great contributor to society, to this employer, to this firm, to your own business if you're doing it. Do you have any models out there of how this could be done by somebody like you? I think this podcast actually provides people with models of how it could be done. And so what we need to do is just get out there and talk about it and show how it can be done. And it's not necessarily about confidence, Gretchen. It's about having models that this can be done differently. It's allowable. It's permissible, and it's important that it be done.
It's really interesting. So talk to me a little bit about how, I guess your money story has played out from being that youth who kind of saw your brother earning all this money, and now we know might have been because he was getting paid for certain risks, etc. But getting paid that, and then moving into your sort of adulthood, getting a job and things like that. Like how did you how initially did you think about managing money, or were you good at it? Were you bad at it? Did you budget? Like what came naturally, and what have you maybe had to think about more?
I think my parents did a really good job of just that basic, don't, save more, spend less, put money aside for a rainy day. I think no matter where you are on the socioeconomic spectrum, those are solid lessons. In fact, I don't think anybody can get anywhere in life without minding those lessons. And so I minded those lessons, and I was so blessed to be married to somebody who also minded those lessons. He came from a family where those lessons weren't minded, and he was really, really aware of the fact that he wanted to mind them. And so, oh boy, I mean, we were just really blessed to find each other and to work that way together. We were also really lucky. When I wrote about this in my book, that when I was in a class during my postdoctoral fellowship, a professor just burst into a class one day, into another professor's class, in the midst of just an absolute panic attack, and asked to have like 5 minutes to speak to the class. And he just poured out his heart. I guess he had just come off the phone with his financial advisor. And at the age of 67, he'd just been told that he could not retire because he had spent all of his life apparently ignoring the advice of his financial advisor. One of the one of the foolish tendencies of medical doctors is to try to avoid paying taxes at all costs, rather than, really trying to invest prudently. And so he just invested in all of these crazy things. And his last scheme had just gone belly up. And so now he was going to have to go home and tell his wife that he'd really blown it. And so he was telling this auditorium full of like gaping 20 somethings that, don't do what I did. And so, and what we should do instead of what he had done. And I don't know if anybody else in the class took that lesson, but I had never even heard of financial advisors at that point. But I dutifully went home and, told my husband what I'd learned, and went and like looked up 3 financial advisors out of the phone book, and went to one, and she said, "Oh, honey, you can't afford me, but here's what you should do. Come back when you've done this." And so we did the things that she did, and came back 3 years later, and after we, sort of built up a nest egg, and she said, "Huh, nobody's ever come back." But I'm just really grateful to her that, she gave us a financial education beyond just the, save, save,
See.
save less, save more, spend less. And this is what you do with this thing. So these were some of the foundational aspects that I'm just really glad that we did, and that we learned something about safe, prudent investing, that this fellow who had been so interested in chasing the hot deal, I witnessed this acute emotional distress by somebody who was awash in regret at the end, where he was running out of runway for earning Gretchen, at 67. Like, what did he have left to, boy, this was supposed to be when he was retiring, apparently.
And he was going to have to go home and deliver that to his loved one, that she couldn't, that they weren't going to be spending next summer doing X, Y, Z.
In America, we're going to have to wait. So all of these, often it's during these witnessed or directly experienced moments of heightened emotion where some of these life lessons around money really get kind of branded into your brain and your heart, and sometimes if these happen in your life when you're little, you're like an owl, like you're all eyes when you're a little kid, and you're witnessing them, but you don't really have the life experience or the cognitive ability to understand them. You just know that something really intense is going on, but you don't know how to place it or where to hang it. And so as a financial psychologist, I spend a lot of my time trying to help people unpack what did you make of it then? Do you think that's really the lesson that your parents intended to convey? Would it be worth a conversation with them? Or even if you can't have that conversation, or it was what they intended to convey, is it your value? Is it your understanding? Is it really what you want to carry on with you now? That was their pathway. But is it your value? Is it your wisdom? Is it what you want to carry with you? And is it what you would want to convey to the people around you now?
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because so many people say to me the same thing as you, instilled in them was, save, spend less. But we can see also that play out, especially when you're younger, that it kind of like pushes you in the other direction. I know that at certain points in my life, it was almost like I was ignoring this message that I'd had, going down the other way for a while. And you can see all of those things play out, which is why it's so fascinating. But I also, from what you've said, that can really relate to that concept of in adulthood, things happening when that it's a really difficult time as well. and you see things happen, and how are you going to react to those things? Like you've saw the professor having his, meltdown.
Mhm.
And we all experience different things when maybe someone passes away, and how their family's been able to deal with things, or if there's illness, and we see these things, happen as we get older. But are we acknowledging, or how are we absorbing that, and how is it changing our lives, is quite fascinating kind of to think about.
Yeah, and just because something could go wrong, like I work now with a lot of business families that have accumulated significant wealth, and they're really concerned that the wealth could create spoiled, entitled children. And could that happen? Absolutely. Have we seen that happen? Sure. We could probably pick a name out of the news in any given week. But, you know, those are the names that make the news. And the outliers are the ones that make the news. And the quiet, great family, great family members who are just living normal lives, doing good things, raising their own wonderful kids, doing good works, and just going about their business. They don't make the news. And so if we keep our eyes on the train wrecks, that's what we steer towards. And we end up making the most conservative, controlling decisions. Um, and so I think it's just super important that we keep our hearts attuned to what do we want to create in our lives. And if what we want is, like whether it's in our child rearing, or it's in our own life building, in our own vision of retirement, or in our own vision of what kind of a world do we want to create for ourselves and the people around us, can we keep that vision in mind? Because as you probably know, this as a financial advisor, you see it every day. We steer where we stare. So what are we staring at? And if we can just constantly recalibrate. But if you look at the train wrecks, you're going to make such conservative, controlling decisions. It will not get you to a good place.
And do you think your approach to, I mean, you mentioned earlier that your husband and you, were pretty aligned with your thinking about the way that you wanted to manage money. Do you think that that's changed as you've got a little bit, as you've grown together and got a bit older?
Um, yeah, I think sometimes, at first we were super, super frugal. At times, I think we were too frugal. We didn't let ourselves relax enough. Um, that whole magic of compound interest that you learn about. It's how this is like this accelerating curve. It's like you find yourself in middle age going, frick, they weren't even kidding. Like this happens. It's like we probably could have like loosened the spending a little bit when the kids were younger, and allowed ourselves some more treats. Allowed them some more treats. That would have been a good thing. So if I have regrets, it's probably around that I could have loosened up and made my life a little bit easier at various points, that I would have been just a little less stressed.
That's really interesting because, yeah, one of my other questions was going to be, around how do you think it's, now looking at it, balancing, that desire to save with the desire to enjoy wealth is a thing that comes up as a financial planner so often. And I think especially coming out of COVID, we've got a lot of people saying, I've got to live, I want to live a bit more for today rather than, because our psychology changed
Mhm.
quite a lot coming out of that, living through that and thinking we could have all, I see that repeated. Doesn't really matter what age of people that I speak to. So yeah, it's interesting to hear you say that actually, reflecting back that you and your husband might have been able to do that. Like, as you say, enjoyed things a little bit more when the kids were younger.
I who knows, the path not taken, where that maybe it would have unleashed a monster within. I would have, become I don't know. I'm not talking about the kind of spending that just would have left me with more stuff that also then I had to take care of and dust, like not that kind of stuff. But, just maybe more help, more services that might have, or just, given the kids more opportunities to explore their interests. I don't even know. All right. I don't know at this point, but I just know at times that it felt tight. Um, we lived thousands of kilometers away from any family, so maybe if we just even allowed ourselves to have more support than we did, maybe that would have been easier. I don't know. But I think sometimes, um, even looking at what the research tells us, that if money can be used not so much to for stuff, but for relief from burden, for giving away, right, and for experiences, that's how it tends to increase happiness. I think the experiential stuff can be overdone too, right? Like, yet another cruise, like, but relief from burden, things that stabilize your life, that's absolutely critical. I see people who have been raised with such frugality that they're, in Canada, they're riding around with bald tires when, snow tires would be a really good idea. Or they're doing without medicine, like for no good reason. Um, that those are money scripts that are so overbalanced, so out of balance, that it's not making any sense whatsoever. And that's where you need a recalibration, because even though saving is good, it can be overdone. Even though spending can be good, as we know, it can be overdone. Even though investing is good, anything can be overdone. And so that's why it helps to have other people in our life who can say, you know, that sounds a little off. It looks
Yes,
a
that
little
that
off.
external kind of third party to be able to, who's not emotionally attached to your money, to be able to do it. But I like the words you use there about using some of that maybe to reduce the burden. I guess here we quite often talk about, using some of your resources to get your time, to give you more time to do those things that you would like to do. Which would make you happier, rather than spending your Saturday cleaning all your house, and not
Right.
being able to spend any time with the kids at the beach,
Mhm.
that kind of thing. I think it's really important, because I think you're right, that kind of experiences thing. I'm going to invest in experiences, because that's what's going to make, good, happy memories for me too. I think some kind, as you said, can be overdone. Doesn't necessarily need to be the, you know, safari holiday that costs that thousands and thousands of pounds that's going to give the best sort of memories. It might be so that you can, have an extra walk and go and buy an ice cream on the beach.
Yeah. Yeah.
So really interesting. And okay, so thinking about the questions I've got, it's quite hard, but I'd like to think about, so given your experience and what you do as a living and all of your research, with your family, do you tend to talk openly now about money with your direct family? And then I'm also, and I said this before we started recording, really interested to know whether people extend that beyond their family. So comfortable about talking about money with friends, maybe people who aren't in that direct inner circle.
Mhm. Um, I really, really make a point of talking to younger people about money. I think they just it's still very much unknown. They have no idea what various professions even make. Um, People, at least in Canada, still have very little awareness of the value of starting their own businesses. there's this notion that if you can't find a job, you're stuck. Like, wait a minute. there's so many things that you could do. There's so many ways to develop skills and to let people know that you would like to use your skills in their service, in exchange for pay. Um, so I really like talking to teenagers and to young adults about that, how it is that they're making decisions about the world of work in particular. I think it's so important that we develop that freedom, the welcome to bring that in. Within our family, we certainly talk about it. There's always been the notion that we are there to support our kids, our nieces and nephews, and the people who call us auntie and uncle, in whatever way we can. There's also a notion that they are definitely expected to make their way in the world, independently, and so that tension of independence and interdependence and being there for one another in various ways has always been an expectation from early on.
Do you think that your skill set that you've developed, I don't know why I'm asking a question, really, because I think the answer is going to be yes, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you think that your skill set that you've developed around, because of the psychology of money, enables better conversations with those young people that you're trying to inspire to think more about, their things than the average? Because let's face it, not everyone is equipped with those skills, Moira, to be able to have those conversations with people we might be coming across who might be struggling. Or so, is there anything that you could give us here today that you think can help open up those conversations, especially if we think about the younger generation?
I think I would just really encourage people listening to the podcast to share not only their successes, but their regrets with people. Like, even to, have silly conversations around the dinner table. Like, what's the dumbest thing you've ever bought? Like, that is such a fun conversation to have with people. What is if you could take anything back to the store, what would it be? If you could go back and buy something that you didn't buy that you really wish you had, what would it be? And just opening up some of those conversations. What might you have invested in that you didn't? And what wouldn't you have invested in that you did? And just so that people understand, that everybody makes mistakes, and that they're recoverable. That mostly that second part. B, that they're recoverable. Right?
Yeah,
That you
and just
get to live to tell the tale. Sorry, Gretchen.
no, not absolutely. I think, and so because often I ask about people's fear around money, but I think a lot of that is around making mistakes, not having enough. The most of the responses are around not having enough, not knowing if I've got enough, or making mistakes, and not feeling that they know enough. So if we can open the conversations more around, actually, we all make mistakes, and we all sometimes need to adapt our plan to make sure that we've got enough, and at least be able to have these conversations, we can start to know that it's okay to go and ask anyone. It's especially okay to go and ask a professional that question. But if we're not even willing to talk about it over the dinner table, about things that we might have done wrong, or what our aspirations might be, then I think that's where we're kind of getting a little bit, I'm trying to break down some of that with some of these conversations that we're having. That's the ideal.
Well, and also to have humility about generationally, does it really make sense for somebody in their 20s? Does it really make sense to tell them that buying a house will be the best decision you will ever make? Really? Is that really the best financial advice you could ever give them? Does that truly make sense now? Does it truly make sense to say getting a university education is the best decision you can ever make? What's the evidence for that now? That may have been the evidence 50 years ago, where, you know, every university graduate had something like 70 job offers 50 years ago. 30 years ago, it was getting a little dicier. 10 years ago, those stats were very, very different. And now, not good at all, especially with certain degrees. So, you know, telling people, do your research, you know, education combined with marketable skills. Now that's a 1-2 punch that's hard to beat, right? So what, you know, get educated in things that you love and make sure along the way that you're also collecting marketable skills. How do you know what skills are truly marketable? How would we find that out? Getting marketable skills just because they're marketable, that sounds like a way to destroy your soul. So what would we be looking at there? You know, having that kind of cross-generational humility and curiosity and a willingness to be both mentor and mentored in this kind of conversation. Because if you're in your 50s, you know what? You need to be developing marketable skills too. And you need to be getting this information in case you get laid off.
And things are just changing so quickly as well. Like, it's crazy. And I feel like, you know, I'm not 50, I'm 45, and I still have to constantly think about, you know, what's new in the world of work. Or now we've got all of this AI and tech hitting us. And, you know, we've also got, you know, ways that we need to develop our inclusion knowledge and how we're going to communicate with people, and all of those things are just so different from, you know, if you put in my father's work days when he's almost, you know, in his mid-70s. So life was very different. So if he is giving advice down to generational who are now 10 as his grandchildren, you know, it's a different world. And how are we going to be educated enough to kind of be able to help them still, as you say, rather than just the adage of university, buy a house. Things have changed so much. Yeah, it's really, really interesting to think about that. Moira, could you share with me, because I'll do 2 final questions then. So one is, I'm not going to ask you about the worst thing you ever bought, because, you know, but what tell me about maybe your most joyful, I say financial memory, but, you know, it might be something you experienced, it might be something you did, but talk to me where money felt good in that instance.
Well, just on the other side of my office, my glass office door here, is a harp, which I bought with a scholarship that in my first year of graduate school. Sort of a stupid thing to buy, like if we're when I didn't have much money. But one of the things that I didn't have access to as I was growing up was, you know, access to music lessons, and I'd always wanted it. And here I had money enough for the basics as I entered graduate school, and I had always wanted to get a harp, and I bought a harp with this extra money. And all these years later, I still have a harp. I still am super bad at playing it.
I was going to say, do you play it?
But when we, you know, as we get off the podcast today at 10 o'clock Central Time, I have a harp lesson, and it gives me joy all these years later. So some things may not, you know, in terms of return on joy, that's given me lots.
That's pretty high up there. And you are I mean, I'm recording this in Wales, where harps are obviously one of the
Oh,
major instruments that are played. So I know how beautiful that can sound. But it's pretty tricky to master. So I'm not surprised you're still
yeah.
having the lessons.
Even a harp played badly is so much better than a clarinet played
Yeah,
badly. One might even say that a clarinet played well, but that would be way too cheeky to say out loud. So I
that's a bit too cheeky. Yeah, yeah. Oh, well, no, that's really nice, isn't it? That's a lovely memory to have, and that it's still in your home and you're still enjoying it. So the final question then, which is one that you'll no doubt have been asked before or asked people, but what does financial freedom mean to you?
Mm. I think it truly is being able to um, live within suddenly altered means, because we have experienced that several times in our lives, where there have been reversals of fortune because of factors way outside our control, and because we have just been, we haven't had debt, um, we haven't been under anybody else's thumb or control. That's been we've been masters of our own destiny, to a large degree. So, being able to pay off the mortgage and not have credit card debt has just meant that we can choose what it is that we want to do with our time and our careers. And so I guess it's about freedom to choose what happens next, even when life is happening to us. That's been a pretty sweet thing.
Thank you, and thank you for sharing today. I think well, I've learned a lot. I'm sure the listeners will have as well. And I know that, as you said, it's a bit tricky with the roles being, slight role reversal, or at least being asked the questions in this way. So I really appreciate you sharing everything you have with us today.
Been a joy. Thank you.